In my first session, I was talking about some of the important matters about the nature of chaplaincy in general. And now in my second session, I will talk about the nature of higher education chaplaincy and how that can inform chaplaincy practice across the different sectors, including health, law enforcement, and the armed services. Chaplaincy in higher education settings has discovered some of the following things to be important that the chaplain is and does. They understand the geography of the place. They provide a non-judgmental service. This is also part of the balancing act. They offer a distinctive perspective on truth. They sustain their own spiritual life by being present and engaging. And they enable the spiritual well-being of the organisation. First, though, some more historical background about what has shifted. In terms of historical background, before the revolutions in the church and in the establishment of nation states and political thinking, in all that millennia after Martin of Tours, before the age of the Enlightenment in education, philosophy, the arts and sciences, before all that, there was one science. That was the queen of the sciences. In much of the West, of course, that was. And of course, the queen of the sciences was theology. Chaplains, where they were present, were there to reinforce a singular worldview that the institution already knew was true. The first prisons also wanted a chaplain to help cure the soul of the prisoner. Spiritual reform was seen as the priority while the body was punished. These truths seemed solid back then. The military chaplain back then reassured the unit that God was on their side and that if they died in battle, it was not in vain. Once the revolutions and the Enlightenment came, though, the chaplain was placed, as I explained in my first talk, in very unfamiliar territory. Now the chaplain needed to relate as having a different perspective to the organisation they were in. The church had long foreseen the difference. The separation between church life and secular life was regarded as a healthy distinction in the life of a people. Not everything could be about church, but this separation between church life and secular life was one made by the church to explain where its own authority diminished and the authority of the state was stronger. And so when the chaplain arrives these days in the secular setting, the chaplain arrives without alignment to the secular organisation, without authority in the secular organisation, and without being looked after by the Queen of Sciences, because there are so many different views of meaning in secular life. The Christian view, the Hindu view, the Muslim view is just one view among many views. And so we come to geography, and the need to understand the geography. Depending on the size and scale of a higher education institution, it typically will take, in my view, a chaplain 4 to 7 years to understand the complex geographies of the place. I do not only mean the physical geography of a place, I mean its total structure, or to use a different metaphor, the total river. Where things flow, where things get stuck, what the currents are, what happens where at the point where rivers join together, and where there are silt beds or weak parts of the riverbank. The geography varies very much from institution to institution in higher education, because typically wherever in the world, each place is independent of the next educational place. It has its very own style, ethos, history, and attitudes. It sets its own vision and goals, much more in higher than in secondary or primary education. I already spoke in the first talk about learning the language of the organisation. This I see as a smaller part of discovering the total geography of the host organisation. And I see this discovery as a spiritual exercise of prayerful discernment and discovery, and also a matter of having covered the ground by going to enough activities, meeting enough people, and seeing the place from many different angles and points of view. It does also include understanding the physical geography, but understanding that as others experience it too. It is one thing to know how to find one's way around. Though a more senior chaplain told me in my early days as a chaplain back in 2001, that it is crucial to walk the many routes that others walk physically around the place, to walk in different patterns and directions and at different times. That way you meet different people, read different notice boards, and see what others see. My second point is about non-judgmentalism. Pastoral support must reach across all boundaries, and so people seek out the chaplain because they know they will not be judged in the way the organisation may judge them. A person may fear that a chaplain will judge them because of the religious convictions the chaplain holds, but again, the spiritually wise will see that suspending judgment allows people to explain more fully what they are experiencing. How they seek to make amends will depend on who has been wronged and what restitution is needed. Whichever institution we serve in, the person who comes to us desires for us to see the difficulty, the predicament the person has, first from their point of view, and of course also to explain what we understand from our point of view too, about them and about the organisation without condemnation. Others may condemn them anyway, and they may condemn the organisation. This is so much the case in law enforcement chaplaincy, but in health and the armed services and education, many others may seem in command of a person's destiny. The chaplain is a safe place to come to, and the person knows that the chaplain will be there to help that individual face their destiny, not to judge them yet another time for the choices they have or haven't made. We also, as chaplains, already stand as strong reminders of the ultimate matter of destiny, that of the person's pathway into God. And so we do not need to say very much, if we need to say anything all, to remind people of this, their path to God. We are chaplains after all. We're also required to offer perspective on truth. People will crave to discover our opinion, despite everything I have said about them wanting us to be not judgmental too. They will still wonder all the time, what do we think? The greatest theologies of liberation can guide us in empowering the spiritual thinking of those who come to seek our counsel. Some chaplains may want to lord it over the people who seek advice. Others of us will want to equip and empower people to deepen their own knowledge of the love of God and be able to make use of spiritual knowledge and enlightenment through their lifetimes. Our perspective will be asked for time and again on ethics by the leaders of an organisation troubled by their conscience, by a student or staff member who has a personal crisis at home, by those worried about a difficult moral choice at work or with their money. The academic may want to hear a different point of view, and the student may want to relate their faith to their studies, or their studies to their faith. Each of these opportunities can be one for us as chaplain to just offer our perspective, or the church's perspective. Those of us who are committed to the empowerment of others will give the people who come to us the tools to develop their God-given ability to discern the work of God in their life for themselves and the meaning that guides our believing and our belonging. The organisation and its members also benefit when we're spiritually present and engaged. A chaplain can show and embody what it is to be a spiritual person in the workplace. There are many church leaders who can show how to be spiritual at the church gathering, in Sunday worship, and at prayer, praise, and Bible study meetings. There are only a small number of us who will show what it is to be visibly carrying out a religious and spiritual set of tasks in the ordinary day-to-day life of an ordinary community. To be spiritually present means to quickly learn how to be prayerful and alert to the divine in everything that we see and say and do. And our spiritual presence needs to be combined with our engagement around. If there is a tragedy or the organisation is impacted by wider events, it is knowing when to connect, when to offer a liturgy or a prayer, when to write someone an email or send a note or card. This engagement also includes the prophetic, when to speak truth to power and to speak it well. Knowing how, when, and where to be prophetic requires discernment. It is possible to earn the right to be the critical friend of the organisation, but no organisation wants to be criticised 3 times a day, every day of the year. I tend to think I will only ask one such critical question a year of any particular area of my university, and I make sure to be very supportive of them for the rest of the year too. Then I'm heard better when I speak. Of course, I will make smaller suggestions and recommendations for improvements many times in a month, but that is more about collaboration, working together, not so much the prophetic voice, which is harder to develop. And finally, and to conclude my 2-part talk, the chaplain, I believe, fundamentally, and in some ways most of all, is there for the enabling of spiritual well-being. Enabling the spiritual well-being of the organisation and the individuals we meet in our chaplaincy work is our role. No other role in the organisation will have this as their number 1 priority, so let us commit to making it our priority. This will help us tell if we are using our time well, and it will help us tell if we're occupied by the principles and purposes that lead to institutions wanting to have chaplains there in the first place. I'm sure you have many examples of enabling spiritual well-being, and for every setting and every context, there are so many different stories to tell. What is crucial is to speak this way about why you are there in that working community as a chaplain, and be ready to give a clear answer as to how you are enabling spiritual well-being and what difference you hope that will make. Organisations, at the point of wanting to tell if something is worthwhile, tend to count the numbers of things or the numbers of people. But when we talk about well-being and spiritual well-being, we are talking about whether people were uplifted and enabled to become more fully themselves and to express the image of God that is inherently within them. For us as chaplains, to help that happen, even for just a few people, will transform lives. And if it transforms the lives of the leaders of the future, as is so often the case in education, then those small transformations of single lives will help transform the lives of many. And that's why we are, as chaplains, there to enable spiritual well-being, to be spiritually present and engaged, to offer a distinctive perspective on the truth while remaining non-judgmental in the pastoral care we offer, and to well understand the geography of the place, so we can serve as the pastor, the prophet, the teacher, and the critical friend of the organisation in which we're placed. Thank you so very much for listening to both parts of this talk, and I'm so looking forward to having some dialogue and question and answer with you all during the course of the conference. Thank you very much, and goodbye.